Welcome to the Relationship Revolutions podcast with Alan Watts, the love engineer. The world needs more healthy, loving and lasting relationships, yet school does not teach how to attract, build and keep them.
Hey, and welcome to today's episode of Relationship Revolutions. And today I am honoured to have an amazing guest. He is Anthony Astbury of the Whole Man Academy. But instead of me telling you all about that, I'm going to let Anthony share that with you for himself. So, Anthony, tell us about the Whole Man Academy.
Thanks, Alan. Where do we start? Let's talk about my childhood to start. No, I'm joking. Let's just go back 5 or 6 years. I worked in the city for 20 years, and around the last 2 or 3 years of that time, started to look around as a lot of men do, maybe in their late 30s, early 40s, and think, is this it? Is this what I want to do? And men often go through, or a lot of men go through phases in their life, just like you might do with a relationship with a partner, as much as a relationship with a job or a hobby or anything like that. And, you know, for a long time, I'd enjoyed it. But at the time when it started to wear a bit thin, I realized that, you know, at the time I was in my mid 30s. So, you know, conceivably, I was going to be another 25 years sitting there doing what I was doing. And although it was well paid and I had a nice, lovely office with overlooking East London and, you know, good working conditions, and I had a BMW convertible and I had a lovely girlfriend and a loving family and a nice townhouse in South London. So all the boxes ticked. But for 10 hours a day, I was fucking bored. And I looked around and thought, there's got to be more to life than this. And I felt like, I mean, we use the term a lot, but I was sleepwalking through life because, you know, it's that alarm goes off at 5:30, you'd get the 6:07 train, you get into work at 7:15, 7 till 5, you'd work, you'd come home, go to the gym, maybe go out with clients, weekends, do stuff, rinse and repeat. And at some point you think, I need to make a change. So for me, when I left the city, it took me a while to work out exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew it would involve personal development. And I traveled around the world to go to, or across the world to go to like Miami, to Tony Robbins events, personal development events in Tenerife as well, at the Ritz in Tenerife, and multiple ones in London. And it was around that time that I came up with the concept of getting men together to talk. Was the first idea, but that's not really enough, because where's the end product? So I started creating events for men, which was getting men together. But also you wanted something tangible at the end of it, because otherwise guys come to an event and they're like, yeah, that was really interesting or motivating, or you had a talk or some ideas, but then it's just them again. So after 12 events in London, then the joys of lockdowns hit, and that completely ruined my entire plan, which doesn't really help when you're trying to create events for men. And after that, I created a podcast, which we now hit 130 episodes. And all of that really was to help a guy lead an epic life. And for me, I was looking at helping the guy that I was when I was in the city. And I call it in the gap, because some people mistakenly thought it might mean that you were trying to help men who are, let's say, looking to take their own life, or suicidal, or, you know, deeply depressed. For me, I wasn't that person at all. I just wasn't happy with where I was and knew I could kind of achieve more. So the Whole Man Academy was born as a movement for men who basically want to lead an epic life. And I'll pass it back to you, but that gives you a nutshell of kind of where we are at the moment.
Yeah, excellent. So men talking, there's this bit of stigma around it, because I've certainly experienced myself and seen other guys experience it, where you grow up, you hear things like, don't cry, man up, get over it, just get on with life. And it's almost like we are conditioned not to talk about anything. But then what happens when we do talk about stuff? I get labeled as a crybaby, and still get told to get over it. And yet there's still an extremely high suicide rate amongst men. So for me, I don't think men need to talk about this stuff all of the time, but having somewhere like the Whole Man Academy to talk if you need it, is absolutely beautiful.
I tell you what, and you've kind of summed up part of the issue correct. When we were brought up, I mean, I'm now 45, so as you were brought up, no one told me not to cry, not to be. It was just kind of like, it wasn't the done thing. And for me, I would say that men just need an outlet. Now, that might be to talk about
Yeah.
things that are going not well for you, or also to talk about what you want to do better, if that makes sense. And you're right, because nobody, it's been frustrating in the last few years. There's this trend to like share pictures of yourself crying online. And usually it's for attention and likes. Sadly, a small percentage of those people are maybe suicidal or depressed and basically want attention. But then there's the attention seekers who just do it because they know they'll get lots of likes and stuff like that. Unfortunately, that doesn't help men, because if you talk about guys talking about their feelings, men can go to looking at what they've seen online and think, that guy looked like a fucking idiot. Whereas we are talking about finding the right people to connect with, who you can say whatever you want to, good, bad, I don't care what you come out with, but you are going to get a sensible response. And I've seen posts where people have said, you should never say man up to someone. Well, it's just words. So it depends. Because if you and I said, we don't live far from each other, said, hey, mate, should we go and, I don't know, let's go for a jog tomorrow. And then you text me in the morning and said, oh, mate, I think it's going to be a bit drizzly, so I'm not going to come along. It's fine to be like, fucking hell, Alan, man up, like, grow a pair, let's go. Don't be pathetic. But if you messaged me and said, and I can't make it because honestly, something's happened and I've actually started, feeling down or depressed or etc. If I then turn around and go, mate, just man up, that's the wrong time to say it. But it's important to clarify that words are just words, and it depends how they're delivered and who they're delivered by,
and also how they are interpreted. Because as Tony Robbins says, nothing has meaning except for the meaning that we give it.
Yes. Yeah.
And that is something we are very, very good at, is giving meaning to stuff, even if that meaning is actually incorrect or completely way off in some shape or form.
Well, it's
how often do we actually self-reflect?
Well, and this is what we're kind of, let's say we're not taught necessarily as we're growing up. And as you said, some people are easily offended. And some people go out to look for being offended, unfortunately, especially online, because people say things online that they wouldn't probably say to someone's face. Yeah. So it's a mindful to navigate for men and women. Both sexes are juggling social media expectation. And I think what you'll find when you speak to the average person on the street is that most of the stuff that they see online, they can block out, if that makes sense. But it's like these days, there's a loud minority of people who the media will promote, who will get to adjust people's thinking or adjust the way people perceive other people think. So there's a long road to go to help men realize that it's okay to talk about things if they're not going well, but just pick the right resource to use.
Yeah, because I heard something said a long time ago, and it's certainly rung true for me, is that women will be reluctant to share their body with a man that they don't trust, whereas men are reluctant to share their feelings with someone they don't trust.
Spot on.
And that goes true whether it's male, female, or anything.
Yeah.
And you only really get that one chance at being there for someone. And if you criticize them, judge them, they ain't coming to you again.
Yes. Yeah, it's very, again, it's being selective. And I mean, we've got 3 little boys. One of them's only a baby, but the other 2 are kind of 6 and nearly 4. And even for them, I have to think very hard about how I speak to them, because sometimes the 3 or the one that's nearly 4 is in that phase of the moment where they have meltdowns all the time about seemingly the most ridiculous things. And of course, they don't have the cognitive ability to process all of that. But sometimes I've found myself being like, oh, stop crying. And then I'm like, no, hold on a minute. Like, how's that helping? So even for me, I find myself doing stuff that I think that's probably not going to help.
No, I think we're on, especially as parents, we're on autopilot a good 80% of the time. And so often I hear my parents coming out of my mouth. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to talk with you today, because I figured you'd be one of the best people to have this conversation with, and that is the 5 silent struggles of men. Now, I don't know if you'd agree with these 5 things, but it'd be good to dig into them. So number 1,
let's go.
They put everyone else first. whether it's the boss, whether it's a career, whether it's a wife, whether it's kids, they always put everyone else's needs first. Number two, as they get older, especially from the late 30s onwards, they start feeling lonely. They've lost the way, lost the connection with their friends because life's kind of got in the way.
Yep.
Number three, that need to be the provider and the protector, which so much for society puts that pressure on, and so much of it is about financial.
Mm.
And number four, they seek a deeper connection and meaning within their own life. And number five, a lot of them feel like they're lacking purpose and passion.
Yeah, and each five of those could be a whole podcast in itself.
Absolutely.
But let's pick a couple of them. But if you say number two again, remind me what number two was.
Number two was feeling lonely, having lost connection with your friends.
So I see that so much, especially with the unlawful lockdowns and outrageous way that our freedoms were curtailed in the couple of years from 2020. That all that did was make that worse, because for so many men I've either interviewed and or spoken to through the Whole Man Academy or just friends, before then, I don't think I'd met many guys that, I'm not saying they weren't lonely, but they hadn't felt it as hard as during the lockdowns. And of course, they were bombarded with propaganda by the news, but also, I spoke to guys who were, fairly decent level of a company, professional guys, earned good money, blah, blah, blah. But they were told they had to work from home, or they were forced to, sorry, not told to, they were forced to. And it crept up on them that to start with, men thought, this is great, I can work from home. But very quickly, it's just you and four walls. Doesn't matter how expensive your property is or where you live. And that certainly has been something for men and women that I've spoken to in the last, let's say year and a half, because some companies have made it permanent working from home, which I think is, again, it's like water. If you have too much water, you'll drown. If you don't have any water, you'll die. So there's always a balance to be had. But certainly it's made worse in the last couple of years. But I did a talk or a panel event for Havas Media, one of the big media companies based in London in King's Cross. And it was very clear to, when talking about the research of, again, for guys, and this links into, I think it was number 4, about men as they get older not having the social circle to do things with. And if you speak to the average guy of, let's say, our age, who might have a dad who's 65, 70, a lot of them, I'm not saying all, but won't have any other male friends, or there'll be 1 or 2. Now, I think some of that has changed because we've got the medium of, you and I could connect today if we wanted on email, WhatsApp, Telegram, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, so many different ways, where the older generation did not have that, and even though it had mobile phones, they weren't around till they were maybe 40. But certainly social media has connected people, but obviously it's also, I think, masked a issue of loneliness, because it's easy to just be looking at your phone the whole time instead of getting out and meeting other men. And do you know what? That's, as you've been to 2 of our Whole Man Academy dinners, I know privately 1 or 2 of the guys there are busy with work, busy with other stuff, and they've got a family, but they haven't got any, or not any, but 1 or 2 good male groups that you can just go and have a laugh with. It doesn't have to be some transformative experience. So yes, the loneliness one isn't one that people want to talk about, but because it sounds embarrassing to say you're lonely. But I know myself, I felt lonely when I moved to the Cotswolds because I didn't have any male friends here. And then it's not till you find some friends that you do get on with, you realize that you look back and be like, yeah, I was probably a bit lonely. So it's an interesting one to talk about. Yeah,
definitely. And I think for me, there's a big difference between being alone and being lonely. Because when I reflect back on my journey, one of the times I was most alone is working in the Aussie outback on a cattle station. And for 8, 10, 12 hours a day, I was in a ute on my own.
Yeah.
And it was beautiful. I had time to reflect on my own life, listen to music, whatever I wanted to do. The time when I was most lonely was in a marriage that was unhealthy at best.
Yeah.
Even though I wasn't alone.
Yep. And there's the old saying, isn't it? You can be in a room full of people and feel alone. And I think I can't remember the statistics, but it was a report that was published about that, where, and again, we're focusing on men here because that's my thin slice of expertise and what have you, was that, and I found it myself, when you become disillusioned maybe with your job, or you start something new, although you've got loads of people around you, you haven't got the connections that you need. And I remember reading about a professional footballer who said, he joined a new team that was maybe 150 miles away from where his family and his friends were. So he couldn't go back to see them very often. And even just going into a changing room, unless people embrace you, and I don't mean physically, but just, in a kind of in a group setting, you can suddenly feel like lonely, like you're sitting with another 10 guys in a room. So it's one that I'm not even sure how people counteract it, apart from sometimes you have to put yourself out or do your best to put yourself in situations where there's a social aspect, because basically no one else is going to do it for you.
Yeah, because although people may see you, they may see you on your own, not talking to anyone, they don't know if you're on your own because you're having a bad day, you've just got some bad news, you want to reflect for yourself, or you're just an antisocial so-and-so.
Yeah. Or
if it's just the fact you're an introvert and it's like, hey, I need my space. You guys do you over there.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure quite how well that fits into a team game in the changing room.
I think you're kind of, alluding to it there. It's about a bit of balance, because I think it's important for a guy to be able to be fine on his own, and when I lived on my own, I never felt lonely because I was very busy doing other, I'd go to the gym, I had girlfriends, you had work. So even though I lived on my own, I don't think I ever felt lonely in my own time. But I know some guys that, I think generally because there's other stuff going on in their life they're not happy about, that the alone time gives them time to reflect on what they're not happy about. And that's where it becomes a more interesting conversation, because you say, okay, well, you should be fine being on your own for a period of time. I mean, we know isolation in prison is the biggest punishment you can have, that they can dish out. So, we are social beings, but being able to be okay on your own, I think if you aren't, it's because there's something else going on.
Yeah, definitely. And everything is connected, and it doesn't matter where we go or who we're with, we take ourselves with us.
Yes. Yeah.
It's the only one thing that is consistent with everything is yourself.
That's why, Alan, I laugh, because when sometimes you'll speak to people that say, I need to go to Bali and I need to go and find myself. And I'm like, just go and look in the mirror. You're there. Like, you don't need to, that's just procrastination. Yeah. Just tell me what's really wrong, because going away for 6 months to, sit on a beach is probably, you're going to come back the same person. You probably know what the reason, what the issue is, but you just don't want to face it. So that becomes a self-reflective exercise.
Yeah, I found that when I went to Australia. What was it? Back in 2003. Everyone thought I was going for an adventure and the time of my life, and truthfully, I was trying to run away from all my problems.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I found them over there as well.
Yeah. You look in the mirror, find yourself.
Took me with me.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think, don't get it wrong, great to travel, but when people say about they want to find themselves, I always think it's like, you literally want someone to emotionally vomit what's on their mind right now.
Yeah.
Because that's probably the most important thing to talk about. And it was probably, well, it might even be a year ago now, I wrote something for the Whole Man Journal, which people don't know is the kind of a thrice weekly publication that I send out to a couple of hundred guys across the world. And I said, what's the one conversation you don't want to have? Because that's probably the most important one you should be having right now.
Yeah.
What's the one thing, is it that your skin? Is it that you hate your body? Is it that you hate your wife? Is it that your job's pissing you off? Is it that whatever it is it that you've made a bad financial decision? You don't want to tell anyone. Whatever the thing you do not want to talk about, maybe, probably, definitely is the thing that you should address immediately. But it's easier said than done.
Absolutely. Especially when you're in that situation where you're not a member of something like the Whole Man Academy, and you have no place to talk that is safe.
Yeah. Who do you talk to? I mean, that's a big one.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about purpose, passion, and having life meaning.
Where do you want to start?
Where do you want to start? Where shall we start even? How about, what is your dream for the future of the Whole Man Academy, and how does that differ from where it is now?
Yeah, I've realized, if I had my time again, what we're about to launch is the Whole Man Academy membership. And I touched on it earlier. What I realized when I started was that men needed more than just kind of one and done events, if that makes sense. Because there's no accountability when it's back to you so I know this from Tony Robbins events. You could go to a 4-day event and it'd be amazing, and you'd meet great people and you get really excited and motivated and pumped up and inspired. And then Monday morning, it's just you. And maybe it sticks with you for Monday, but by Wednesday, you know, I'm gonna spin in my chair because you look around like, it's just me.
And same shit, different week.
That's it. And very quickly, you kind of, you know, you realize you don't have the accountability, you don't have that network of people. So when I first started doing the events and the dinners, I'd actually always thought about some kind of membership thing. But to be honest, I just was being busy doing other stuff. And then it was around this time last year that I, you know, looked more into it and realized that I was missing a trick, because a lot of the guys that were part of it, I sometimes got asked, how do I join the Whole Man Academy? And I'd say, oh, well, yeah, you can watch the podcast, read the journal, and you could sign up for some coaching and stuff. But that wasn't what they wanted. So the membership that we'll be releasing in September, so depending on when this goes out, but it's about several things. But one is building a network, a strong network of men who want each other to win and are going to help each other get there. Because I want to be surrounded by men who, firstly, can speak their mind, can have bold conversations, and aren't worried about, oh, if I say this, they might be offended. No, you want guys who can be completely, I know the term gets bandied around, but authentic, you know, a lot of real talk.
Yeah.
But also saying, in a nutshell, what is it that you want? You know, maybe you want to make a change. You know, how are you going to get it? Let's see if we can connect you with someone that can help you, and let's go after it. And again, that could be financially, spiritually, for your health, could be your career, your business, whatever it is. But on that, I also want guys to when they connect, to be able to go to some cool experiences together. So, you know, you and I are close to each other in the Cotswolds anyway, but enough of the men that I know that live in, I don't know, suburban areas are desperate, are yearning to get out to a woodland, a campfire. You know, it doesn't have to be camping and shouting kumbaya, but just getting back to nature and having an experience instead of just the usual boring treadmill weekends. So for me, in this next year, my sole focus is basically launching and building the Whole Man Academy membership to have a small, so we're not talking of trying to have like 1,000 members or something, but let's pick a number. Let's say in the first year, 50 men who want to lead an epic life and are prepared to do something about it and want to get together with other like-minded individuals.
Excellent. So of all the different things that that you do with the coaching, with the retreats, with this new membership that's coming up, what is it? What's the one thing that lights you up the most?
It's a good question, because I would say it depends on who you're working with. So I know from either my own experience or years of being friends with people in the, let's call it, personal development space, that you can have two people with similar issues or goals, dreams, desires, and you give them the same information, tools, techniques, tips, advice, and one will go off and implement all of it or most of it and they'll be flying. Other one won't do anything or a little bit and they get stuck in the reeds. And it just reminds you that, and it's nothing to do with them parting with money, because I know people that have spent thousands. I spent 6,000 on a course once, didn't do anything with it. So it wasn't the course's fault. It was that I wasn't ready to kind of receive the info and actually do some work.
Yeah.
So for me, the personal coaching is the one that when it's long-term, I think that's where you can implement the biggest change and the biggest impact. Yeah. And I always use a great example of a guy who got introduced to me a few years ago, and he was a professional earning good money, single at the time. And he came to me through someone else and just said, I'm kind of a bit lost. You know, sometimes it's not that someone knows exactly what it is. It's like something's not right. And one of the big things, this will date it, it was before the COVID bullshit. So it was before working from home was a thing. And we sat down and went through all the things he wants to achieve, all the things going on, and really kind of, got all those things out. And then I said, okay, what's happening with work? And he said, basically, I want to leave. I don't like it. What do you want to do? I said, I want to be a tennis coach. And I said, great. I said, just to check, like, are you happy to work kind of weekends and evenings? Because that's generally when I'm not saying all tennis coaches, but it's going to work. And he was like, oh no, I don't want to work evenings or weekends. I said, okay. So he's like, actually, forget the tennis coach. I said, let's be clear. Is it your job or is it something to do with your job? And for him, it wasn't that he hated it. It was that he felt like he was stuck in a rut. And I said, what would make the working week easier? Because it's easy to leave a job. It's very hard to go back to it once you've left it. And especially if you're working for a small firm, it's not just you can go and get a job somewhere else. And his thing was that Monday to Friday was so mundane. So we said, well, what would a good working week look like? And he said, well, I'd love to work from home 1 day a week. And I said, okay, who said you can't? And he said, well, I don't know. I've never asked. So literally, I haven't got my phone, but got my phone out. Yeah. And, 5 minutes later, had agreed that he could work from home 1 day a week. And that 1 day a week would be a Wednesday. And that would mean that he didn't have the 45-minute commute, which meant by about 2:30, 3, he could finish work and go and play tennis, which is what he loved doing. And that set him off on the path of, well, actually, I'm okay with work. That takes the pressure off of leaving work. He then met someone. He got healthier. He stopped drinking. He'd stopped smoking. They had a baby. They moved in together. They got married. It sounds like a fairy tale. That took 4 years. But the man that he was when he walked in compared to the man that he was when we, stopped working together. And that's the key. You don't want to work with someone forever because you're not doing your job. You want someone to be doing so well. They're like, listen, this has been great. I don't need you anymore. You're like, great, off you go. And that for me is the long-term transformation that you can't do in 1 hour. It doesn't matter if someone gave you 100 grand. It's got to be, how's it going this month? Well, I fucked this up. This is getting me down. This is going well. Great. Let's tweak this. What's going on this month, next month, next month? And, a year later, 2 years later, you look back and he's unrecognizable to the man he was, to himself and his family and his now partner. But, that for me is where the magic happens, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I don't think I've ever had any personal development session that's had a massive impact that's totally changed my life. Every single little bit has been this step, this step, this step, this step. And all of a sudden you're around the corner that you never even knew existed. Yeah.
Yeah. You look back and like you just said there, it's little steps, because if you load, let's say I sat in front of you now, or a guy or a woman, and said, right, I'm going to help you. That I know so much because I've coached or consumed or read or listened or have you, that if I dump everything that I think you should do on you right at once, you'll just be overwhelmed and do nothing. Whereas it's saying, okay, well, let's look at your sleep. Let's just tweak that a little bit, because that makes a big difference. What are you eating? What are you thinking? What are you consuming? I mean, if people are looking at the news, that's like red flag number one. It's like, listen, easy win there. Stop watching the news. Well, it's not news. It's just carefully curated, lies and propaganda. But once you stop watching that and stop reading the newspapers, I mean, there's one of the simplest ones to help you. You could spend the time you were doing that either exercising or speaking to loved ones, et cetera, et cetera. So there's always little things people can do. But yeah, you can't just dump everything on someone.
Yeah, the difference it made when I stopped watching the news and reading newspapers, it's amazing.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about men, and mainly because that's your area of expertise, shall we say? But I want to talk about for women for a second. And what I'd like to know is, because there's a lot of women who may be in a long-term relationship or married or have a dad or a brother who they know there's something going wrong. They know he's not happy. They've tried the nagging. They've tried telling him what to do. They've tried telling him to get help. What can they do that will actually help and get through his skin?
It's a good question. And I think it's important, as you just said. I mean, firstly, not always, because there's a saying like men don't want to be told what to do. Well, it depends, because like if I've got a leak in the house and I just want someone to tell me what to do, I don't want to work it out for myself. Thanks very much. But I think when men, if they're having and again, let's call it silent struggle, because that's the term that I use, or I heard another term, which is in the pit. You know, it's things, you feel like you're in the pit, things aren't, the pit doesn't sound good and things are going wrong. Firstly, it's about giving them the space, because you cannot force someone to want to talk about anything. So one of the ladies that I did an event, I was on a panel, all women's event about 2 years ago, which was brilliant, because the women were basically told, okay, there's going to be 4 men on the panel, ranging from 35 to 60. And you can write any question you want on a piece of paper, and we'll put it in a bowl, and basically we'll divvy those up between the men and just get the men to answer whatever it is. An example, the first question that I picked out was, what's the big deal about blowjobs? And I was like, okay, like, good strong start here, you know, something like that. So but one of the ladies I spoke to there, who came up afterwards, basically asked the question you said, and I was like, it's a bit like, you need to either have the resources available that he could notice around the house, or you could just mention it in passing that you'd heard this guy talking about the Whole Man Academy, for example, or anything else. But here's the thing. If it's a guy who is quite closed, he's probably not going to want to hear about some charity. And that's where the Whole Man Academy differs, because I know enough people that do good work with charities. But again, I didn't need a charity when I was just disillusioned with life. And no man is going to honestly say, go down the, let's call it pub or office, what have you, and say, oh yeah, I'm just thinking of getting in touch with this charity to help me with what things are going wrong. They are not going to do it. And if they are, fine. But from most of the men I spoke to, aren't. So what the woman wanted to understand is where I came from that. And that's why I wanted the Whole Mad Academy to be aspirational events and content and ideas for men that they want to be part of. So for her, I said, why don't you put on one of my podcasts in the background? You haven't got to say, hey, darling, listen to this. Put it on. Pick one where I'm talking to a special forces operator or a married warrior or a top CEO, and just put it on. Don't even say anything. And because if you say, right, I want you to sit down and listen to this, we've all done it where you're like, I'm not listening to that. Whereas if you can,
why should I do that?
That's it. Why should I? So again, you can't force people to, but you can kind of, you can place things around that make
influence.
That's interesting, because otherwise, if you feel like you're being forced, you're actually going to rebut, if that's the word, but you're actually going to push against it and actively be like, I'm not listening to it only because you've told me. And I know, I share this story a lot, but basically with Emma, my partner, when I was disillusioned working in the city, she said to me, she was already on the personal development train, let's call it that. And she said to me, oh, you should listen to this podcast, whatever one it was. And because I didn't know what podcasts were, I was just like, no, like I'm not listening to it. It's all rubbish. And then I think she did it where it was one in the background, and we were in the car, and it was a guy called Andy Murphy, I think it was, who hosts a podcast called Mindset by Design. He's an English guy that lives in the States. And I listened to it, and then I found quietly I'd listen to it on my own the next day, when I was at the gym. And he was always about mindset. And funny enough, now he's really good friends with me and has been on the Whole Man podcast. But for her, I know what it's like, what I felt like I went back against her because I didn't want to be told what to do, because I needed to do it in my own time. So for women, it is, how can you kind of sneakily place things around or have things playing in the background that might just be interesting, or literally saying, oh, I saw this website that someone was talking about. So it's not go and look at it. So I saw it, and it's, for men that want to lead an epic life. And so it's, it's a slow process, but it can work.
Yeah, it's great answer. So I've heard you say a few times on your podcast that going to Tony Robbins's Date with Destiny, and people say, well, what did you get from that? And you say 2 kids, well, 3 now.
Yeah.
I'm just curious as to whether it was something specific about that Date with Destiny, or just another one of those little step by step things.
It's a good question, and it's an easy answer. They did a whole day on relationships. It was called the Relationship Day. And to be honest, I went there knowing I was excited about the rest of it. But for me, that was like the most important thing I wanted to sort out, because I'd been with Emma for, I think, 2 years. And let's be clear, making a commitment to be with someone for the rest of your life, if you believe that you should do that, which I do, is a big thing, and you don't want to cock it up. And we'd been together, and, you know, to start with, we kind of played at being partners, if that makes sense. You know, we're kind of game playing and stuff, which can be a lot of fun. But at that time, I was like, okay, I know that to honor her needs as a woman, and also my desire to live the life that I want, I need to make a decision now. Are we going to keep game playing, or am I going to stay with her and make a proper go of it? And during the relationship day, which again was a whole day, so it's hard to, you know, compartmentalize it. But ultimately, one of the questions was, if you're someone that isn't sure if your relationship has got a future, ask yourself firstly, are you showing up as the person you want to be in the relationship? You know, are you making an effort? Are you doing everything that you think should? And because most people aren't, let's be clear, because you get slack and you get lazy. You, on your first date to fifth date, for example, you show up as the best version of yourself. You know, you might have shaved, trimmed your beard. For women, they might have, you know, had their hair blow dry, done all these things. And once you get comfortable, you get slack. We all know what that's like. So for me, I realized, number one, I wasn't making the effort that I could have done. I also realized she was making more effort than I was, which was I'd not thought about it. So there was the flip side. I'm not making enough effort. She's making more than enough, and I'm not matching her. But then it was very much about, listen, there's no easy way to know if you should stay with someone, but just give someone a framework. Was go home, and for 3 months, you act or turn up, not act, but you turn up as the person you know you should be in a relationship. And if after 3 months it's still not working, you're done. You know, you can say I've tried, but if after 3 months it is working, then you're on the right path. And that's exactly where we were. Yeah. I came back, I want to say a different man, but just more focused on how am I showing up for her? And, you know, we've now been together for 12 years and we have 3 little kids. And I'm not saying that everything is perfect in our relationship, because it's a relationship with moving parts. But it was one of those things, when, as you said, I got asked, oh, that was a lot of money you spent. What did you get for it? And I, at the time, had 2 kids, and I showed the guy a picture of my 2 little boys and said, two little boys. And he was like, okay, fair enough. I'll give you that one.
Excellent. So one of the questions I get asked quite a lot of the time is, where do I meet that elusive one? So I'm just curious, how did you meet Emma?
So it's a very good question. I'm always super interested in knowing how people met their partner, because you can, sometimes there's a fate thing. One of the guys I used to be friends with, he went to a conference a long, like across the other side of the world, and met this woman and bumped into her, but then that was it. And then the next day he was flying home and bumped into her at the airport. And then they exchanged numbers. And it was just that, that one fleeting, and they lived miles away from each other, but that one fleeting moment that if they hadn't have done that, probably, the whole sliding doors moment. So for me, it was at the Christmas party for the company I worked at. And Emma is a very attractive girl. So that you can understand why I noticed her across the dance floor. And how can I put this in a nice way? She was speaking to someone who was affectionately known as Sweedo the Pedo, a guy who worked for the company. And he was all right, but he just came across, I'm sure he's a nice guy, as a bit of a lech, because he would kind of lean over girls, and he would, so I saw her talking to him, or him talking to her, and I thought, hold my beer, I'm going to go and save her. So I wandered over and said to him, I think someone's looking for you. And, he wandered off, and I said to her, just briefly introduce myself. And then we went off. And here's where it gets interesting. It was a Christmas party, but it was karaoke. And about 10, 15 minutes later, or whatever it was, I saw her again and got chatting to her. And I said, are you going to sing anything? And she was like, oh, no. Like, Emma doesn't have the confidence that I have for like performing, if that makes sense. And I said, well, if you were going to sing I was just trying to make conversation because I fancied her. If you're going to if you're going to sing any song, what would you sing? And she thought about it, and her friend was there, and she said, Kings of Leon, Sex on Fire. And that's what I just written down. That's what I just put on a piece of paper and written down to sing next.
So crazy.
So I said, oh, good, you can be my backing singer. And she was like, oh, right, yeah, I could do that, but I'm not singing. So her and her friend did the backing singing, and then we left each other alone. And then the next day I got hold of her email and emailed her and said, hey, thanks for doing my backing singing. And then that started the conversation. So again, part of that was me having the confidence to go and approach a woman, because these days the big problem is, I read yesterday where a percentage of especially younger men are being told that approaching a woman can become, threatening or offensive. Whereas a lot of women will be like, I want men to approach me. As long as they're not a twat about it, how else are you going to meet someone if someone doesn't approach someone?
Yeah. Yeah. The challenge is what one woman finds is a sexy approach. Another one will say it's perverted or some other word they choose to dismiss it at that time.
Well, there was a really good, let's call it a meme, which I saw shared on LinkedIn ages ago. And it was the same, let's call her, she looked like a secretary type, attractive woman, let's say in her late 20s or early 30s in an office. And it's the same wording, which is something like, hi, Jane, how are you? Or, you look lovely today. But the first one was a man who wasn't very attractive, let's just say that, and looked a bit scruffy and what have you. And she was kind of, in her head, was saying, oh, creep. And it was exactly the same wording, but a guy that looked like Clark Kent, for argument's sake, who looked smart and was dashing handsome. And she just kind of, I don't know, had like, I don't know, was excited by whatever the caption was. And it was classic because, like we said, it's the same message delivered and maybe even exactly the same way. But because you find that person attractive, it's fine. If you don't find that person attractive or the way they say it, you don't like it. So it's a minefield. But for me, it's like, listen, for the risk of someone, I went to girls in clubs and went to speak to them and they told me to go away. But do you know what? That just wasn't the right person. But if I'd have said, oh, that girl told me to go away or she wasn't interested, I won't approach any other women anymore, then I'd be sitting with my dick in my hand in my little flat for the rest of my life, wondering what's gone wrong. So,
yeah. And unfortunately, there's a lot of guys that are either in that situation or will be.
Yes.
For that reason, they haven't built up that confidence. And the confidence comes from action, rejection, and learning.
Yeah. Now, I heard a great saying, which is something like, every rejection you get is great because it means you're one closer to finding the person that you like. And rejection doesn't have to mean because you've approached someone in an inappropriate way. It could be that you just sent someone an email or something and said, like, you don't have to say, do you fancy coming out for a drink sometime? And if they say no, you can look at that as a rejection or just like, this wasn't meant to be. But you've got to try, otherwise you're going to get nowhere. You
either try or nothing. As Yoda says, do or do not. There is no try.
Yep.
So what do you think is aside from having that confidence to walk up to a woman, what do you think is the biggest challenge that guys face within dating relationships these days?
Oh, that's a good question, because I think, to go back to social media, it was a lot easier, I think, when social media wasn't around, because you didn't have there's a lot of people out there giving advice, and some of it is crap. And again, sometimes the same advice can work well for some people and not for others. So I think it can be a confusing time for men and women at the moment, because you've got social media and everybody's got an opinion, but you've also got I think now, because I'm a fan of dating apps because I've got hiccups, but because I saw when I was younger, I was on different dating websites, and my view now is, especially if we're not talking about the 20-year-olds here, let's say, let's talk about the 30s, 40s, 50s. A friend of mine asked me, why he was looking for a partner, and he said, "What, do you think I should go on this dating app?" And I said, "Definitely." Now, he was very good at, for want of a better phrase, pulling women. He was very good at talking to women. He was very disarming, very charming, very funny, but still he hadn't found the right one. And I said to him, the problem is, the older you get, the less chances you're going to have. Because when we were in our 20s, we were out Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday. By the time we're in our mid-30s, people are either busier with work, that they've got a mortgage, so they can't afford to live these days with the mortgage rates. But what you found then was, and people were going out less. So if you're then talking of your late 30s, 40s, 50s, you've got to look at your chances of meeting someone were diminishing because of less opportunity. Whereas if you go on a website and you look at, let's just use 100, let's say a woman looks at a profile of 100 men, she can go, no, 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 no. And she can pick 5 that she thinks look, that tickle her fancy. So she could then message those 5. So she's already found ones that she finds physically attractive. Hopefully they tick some of the other boxes. And now she could go and date all of them and she's not wasting her time. Whereas if she goes out to a bar and you've got to be in the right bar, they've got to be single, they've got to find you attractive, got to be in there at the same time, your chances are reduced massively. So I think it's playing both of them. You go out, obviously that's the most fun is seeing someone that you fancy in a bar or a club or whatever, it could be a train station. But at least with the dating apps, it means you can basically kind of drill down and find a select few people that you do already find attractive and then go from there. So it takes away some of the guesswork for you.
Yeah, it's about creating awareness that you actually exist. Whereas I do feel that a lot of people go onto these sites and they think, I'm going to find my perfect partner here because there's millions of options. So, they've got a funny nose, they're out. Their hair's the wrong length, they're out. They're half an inch too short, they're out. And they've only put 1 paragraph instead of 2, or they've put 10 paragraphs instead of 1.
Yeah.
And it just gets a bit silly.
You've got to give people a chance. And now I spoke about this other day because I was asked about dating apps, and I'm supporting a lady who's a friend of mine who runs a dating app called Ready, which is primarily for people that want a serious relationship and aren't just looking to get laid. And let me be clear, there's nothing wrong with just wanting to sleep with people for a while, because maybe you might be out of one relationship and you don't want to get involved with someone, so you just kind of want to enjoy yourself for a while. I'm a big fan of doing what works for you at the time. But again, for people, there's dating apps and there's dating websites that are specifically for what you're looking for. So again, if you're just looking for casual, there's ones for that. If there's ones, especially there's very high profile ones where you might pay, I'm making these numbers up, but like $5,000 a year, but they will do the searching for you and propose that Alan and Claire would be a really good match and send you together. So they take some of that work out. So again, it depends on what you're looking for and also what budget you've got. But the great thing is at least there's lots of options for people.
Yeah, definitely. So I see quite a few American so-called dating podcasts saying that men are attracted to 3 things in women: youth, beauty, and purity. And that's it.
Yeah.
Is that something you would agree with, or?
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. But there's lots of ways to go with that. It's a bit like, why do men find it more attractive when a woman wears bright red lipstick? It's because bright red lipstick reminds us of the other lady parts that men find attractive. So you could talk about that one. But you're right. I mean, when you say youth, why do you see? I think with youth, and obviously to be clear, we're not talking of under 18s here. We're talking of younger women.
Definitely not.
But what you're looking for there is that a woman is able to give you a child, and I would wager that is inbuilt in you. So for you, if you're looking at if you've got 2 women and one is 25 and one is 35. Maybe there's something inbuilt in you that says that the younger one is going to be more able to conceive. Whether they are or not depends on their lifestyle factors, etc., etc. But let's be clear, beauty comes into it. Now, the question there is, what do you find beautiful? Is it what you truly think is beautiful, or what you're told to think is beautiful?
Yeah.
Because one of my big frustrations is, we could go down rabbit holes with that one, but when you look at things like Victoria's Secret models, they're not real women. I mean, some would wager they're not actually women, but that's a different rabbit hole. But what you're looking at is they are all tall and skinny, and nothing wrong with that because everybody's got a type that they like. But I think, why do you think that for most men, the glamour model type, and what I'm talking about is doesn't have to be, but boobs and bums and curves are what most men find attractive. We don't necessarily want to cuddle something that's a bag of bones. You want to cuddle something that's got a bit of I don't know, a bit of
comfort.
Yeah. And if you start to combine those, and then you've got the purity side. Now with the purity, let's be clear. If you said to the average guy, I'm making these numbers up, you ask 100 men, what's the, is it Family Fortunes, the thing? But we asked 100 men, you could choose a partner, and she's either slept with 2 men or 50 men. It doesn't take a genie eye to go, sure, which one I'm going to pick. Most men would go for the one that might have slept with 1 or 2 men. Now, you could argue that you want them to have had some kind of sexual experience.
Yeah.
It depends. But ultimately, if men honestly answer that question, men don't want a woman that slept with loads and loads of people. Now, the flip side is, why is it seemingly okay that men, men are kind of like applauded for sleeping with lots of women, whereas women aren't? That's an interesting one to talk about.
Yeah.
But so the 3 you've covered. You're right. I mean, there's more to it. I think also, timing wise, when you're maybe a man in your 20s, you just want a young, fit girl who's basically going to be good in bed and good fun. Maybe when you get to your 30s and you're thinking of having kids, for example, you're now looking at a mum that's going to be a great mum and is will nurture your baby and be a good mother that is at home looking after the babies and provides something that you want that maybe you didn't need when you're in your 20s.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I think with the volume or the numbers, shall we speak, there's 2 ways of looking at it. Because if there's not much experience there, she doesn't know what her limits are, what her boundaries are, what she likes, what she doesn't like. And it's the same with men as well.
Yeah.
Whereas if they've had a bit of experience, they can say, I like this, I don't like that. That's completely off the table. And if that one thing is the one thing you want to do for the rest of your life, it's good to find out before you walk down the aisle.
Yeah. Well, it's a really interesting, how can I put it? What to say, concept? No, a tradition of when I was younger and I heard about people saying that they wouldn't sleep together until they were married. Yeah. I found it really hard to get my head around. And I understood that comes from that ticks the purity side of things. But my big worry for me was, I mean, what if you sleep together the first time and it's crap? Then you've just basically, and I can't think of a better phrase, but you've kind of signed your death warrant of you signed away your life of, okay, great, I've got this person that I love, but it's shit in bed. And that is an important, for some people, most people, it's an important part of it. That comes back to years ago, I dated a girl who, I won't name names, but her friend was dating, and I think went on to marry, but a guy that was an England sports star. Let's just leave it there. And she said to me, oh, they're not going to sleep together till they get married. Isn't that great? And rightly or wrongly, she was driving and I recoiled and I was like, what? And she said, oh no, they're going to save that till they get married. And at the time, I mean, maybe it shows my naivety, but I was shocked because I was like, how can you decide to spend the rest of your life together if you've never experienced your level of sexual compatibility? Now, maybe as I've understood more about spirituality and God and what have you, I'm going down more that route these days. So I need to look more into that. But at the time, that was my initial reaction was, you've got to be joking. How could you decide to be with someone for the rest of your life when I knew that some people you sleep with, it's rubbish, and maybe not because of them, but the compatibility, and other people it's mind-blowing. Yeah. And I know that if I was going to spend my life with someone, I want it to be at least nearer the mind-blowing than the rubbish.
Yeah, but then you could also say, well, you've got a whole lifetime together to learn how to push each other's buttons in the mind-blowing way.
Yeah, and maybe it's that you shape,
if you're willing to have those conversations.
That's it. which takes guts sometimes, because
it does.
So yesterday, I was at a networking event and they asked me to do a short talk and give a little gem of wisdom. And I said, look, I'm not short of gems of wisdom, only because I've interviewed lots of 100+ men. So they're not my gems, they're other men's, but I can collate them. And my big thing then was, relationships will shape your success in life, be it in business, at home, in the office, all these different things, with your parents, with your kids, etc. If you have good relationships, I think your life will tick over nicely. And I said, there's one bit of advice that I received from a former police detective in the States, a guy called Craig Castelletto. And he said, if you say to your partner, ask your partner, what can I do to make your day a 10? And it sounds simple, but what you often realize is, firstly, it makes you think about, are you trying hard enough with your partner? But for most people, they don't understand what their partner really wants. Now, you could reflect that back into sexually as much as in doing the chores. And when I said to Emma, how can I make your day a 10? I think she said, like, if you could just unload the dishwasher would be a great start. And I was like, you are the dishwasher. No, I was like, come on, like, is that it? And she's like, no, that would just really help me. Like, and I think there was one or two other things, but generally, for most people, they don't ask their partners what they want. And that might be in the bedroom, in the kitchen, elsewhere. So there's a little bit of advice for people.
Yeah, we expect people to be able to read our minds, or just automatically know what we want.
Yep.
And how we want it, and when we want it, and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
I wonder why so many marriages end in divorce.
Well, and again, I think as we're growing up, no one really gives you relationship advice. So as a man or a woman, you kind of make it up as you go along, and ultimately you want things to be how you like them. But if you don't take time to ask, well, what do you like? And maybe we can find a middle ground. Otherwise, people start off together, and very slowly you start to drift apart. And within 5 years later, you're either say sleeping in separate bedrooms or sleeping in someone else's bed.
Yeah. I think in some ways, a lot of marriages end in divorce before they've even walked down the aisle.
I do know people that have got married who very soon after have said, I've made a mistake. I knew I shouldn't have got married, but the ball was already rolling with the marriage, and you told everybody, and some deposit had been put down. So I kind of hoped it would change. And then on their literally wedding night, they just thought, fuck, what have I done? So, it's a sad state of affairs when that comes in, especially if there's kids involved.
I was one of them.
My
partner as well.
The more people you talk to about, I mean, that is a bit like redundancy. It's not much talked about, but when you do talk about it on, let's say, on LinkedIn, you find a lot of people that found it really hard, and your own views or your own experiences resonate with people. So marriage is one of those things that's not to be taken lightly.
And I think in some ways, the way society and the culture is at the moment is to be deemed a successful marriage, it's got to last all of your life. But we don't take that approach with business and career.
Yep. And I would say I need to, because ultimately, I guess in the eyes of God, then that's where marriage should be, is a forever thing. So I guess ideally you would always be with someone, but like I said, some people you find have also, when they've got married young, are totally different people when you're 20 to you're 30 to you're 40. I've completely changed some of my views, behaviors, ideas, probably in the last 5 years. So the 5 years ago me would probably have argued with me now and told me I was talking nonsense on stuff. You can probably guess some of the stuff it would be about, but so it just reminds you, isn't it, that I think it's a big ask to stay with the same partner. I think it's amazing, and I think in an ideal world you would do, because I think that's great, especially when kids are involved. But the sad thing can be when people stay together when actually they're not right for each other. And I always think you're better off kind of honoring yourself and them by then making that split, sad as it is. And because two unhappy people together don't work, but those unhappy people can go off and find other people and live a kind of a happier life.
Yeah. As long as you go look at your own, the part that you played within that relationship. Because if you approach it from, oh, it's my ex's fault, he's the problem, she's the problem, she did this, she did that.
Yeah.
It takes two to make a relationship work, and it takes two to screw it up. Yeah. And if you haven't got that learning, then you just repeat the same old pattern.
You've made such a good point, because when I say read a lot about this, I've read lots of blogs on men, and ultimately the blogs on men are about women as well, because they make such a important part of our life, and vice versa. And you look at some men, and I just think they are a bit lost, and that because again we've gone back to they're not taught how to, not how to continue a relationship, continue to you shouldn't have to rekindle it. It should keep bubbling nicely. Could, the fire should be kept going. But so many times you realize, and I was listening to a psychologist the other day, a relationship psychologist, who said that often when it comes to divorce, the wife will say to the husband, "I'm done," and the husband will say, "I'll do anything to make it work." And the wife will say, "I've been trying to get you to say that for 20 years, but it's only now that you've decided you want to make this effort." And of course, you could flip that around. Sometimes it's the women that don't make the effort and the men aren't. But if you've got to be showing up and making your own effort, and hopefully that will reflect back on you with your partner.
Yeah, you don't want to be making the effort just because they've said you've got to do this to make it work. You've got to be doing it because you want to do it.
That's it. Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just a lot of bollocks at the end of the day, isn't it?
So I knew it'd get deep and meaningful.
Technical term. So shall we get a bit controversial?
Go for it. There's no topic.
Andrew Tate.
Andrew Tate, yes. Yeah, what's your question?
Yeah, he's shall we say he's a Marmite guy. People either love him, hate him. He talks a lot about and has some, what I'd say is very valid points about masculinity.
Yeah.
But for me, I think he's almost too far on the masculine scale and not connected with a feminine scale. And when that happens, there's no compassion, there's no empathy, there's no connection to emotion. It's just drive, hustle, do this, do that. And if you want to be in a relationship with me, you're going to do this or do that or get out kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which isn't necessarily the best portrayal either of him, of men, and not necessarily the best influence for young boys. Then on the flip side, there's Jordan Peterson, who also talks a lot about masculinity, but he's a lot more in touch with a feminine side, possibly a little too far along the feminine side.
Yep. It's a very interesting one. And I love talking about this stuff because people are scared to, which is pathetic.
Yeah.
Because I would put Andrew Tate, and I've listened to loads of his stuff, and he makes some very valid points. I would suggest people, whether they like him or not, they ask themselves, how would he have got on the front page or in the mainstream newspapers? Because you do not get in them unless they want you to. So if they really didn't like his message, you just wouldn't get on the newspapers at all. You wouldn't get any coverage. That's the best way to shut someone down, is just not to report on them. And social media was very quickly able to ban what they labeled misinformation. But they promoted what he was doing. So I would suggest that there is a reason why he has been allowed to get very big. And he says some very spot on things about, the importance of men working out, making money, being a provider, all that stuff. And I would suggest, again, he is Marmite. But it's like, I think it's important for everybody to be able to say what they want, and whether you decide to listen to it or not is up to you. Great example is Piers Morgan. I can't stand the guy. He's clearly a media puppet that's used to drive agendas, but sometimes he says stuff that I agree with. So I can't say I don't ever want to hear from him again. I mean, I'd happily never hear from him again, but I don't disagree with everything he says. It's probably maybe half and half. So some issues he comes across and I think, yeah, actually, I agree with him on that. Can't stand the guy, but he's right. Same with Jordan Peterson. He's certainly not perfect. And there's certain things he's done recently that he, deeply regrets. I mean, foolishly, he thought that taking the vaccine, he was, famously said he thought that once he did that all the restrictions were pretty much going to be eased. And then soon after said, turns out I was wrong. Well, if he was that clever, he'd been told that wasn't going to be the case by multiple people. But a lot of what he says is very interesting. And I think a lot of men are crying out for people to follow. And there's the danger, in a way, is like, who do you follow? If someone now said, right, there's a guy, let's just say a 30-year-old guy who's got a decent job, earns decent money, and is a nice guy, but he wants to kind of get behind and follow some guys. Who should he follow? It's certainly not an easy one to pick someone that they should use. So it's a very interesting topic. And do you know what? I wrote an article 6 months ago, and I included, and it was about the fact that men should learn to take care of themselves by being physically, doesn't mean you need to be a ninja warrior, but at least lift weights to be physically strong, because you might need to protect you or your mum, dad, kids, partner, someone else, who knows. And I shared that one comment I heard from Andrew Tate was that he said when he was interviewed that even though he is a professional, was world champion, or world-class kickboxer, the difference between being a kickboxer in a controlled environment is that they haven't got a knife, a gun, 3 mates, a chair, or whatever, and they're not going to beat you up when you turn your head. You've got a referee and there's rules, and you've warmed up and you've sparred and you've got ready. Whereas if you're in a nightclub or a dark place or something, you have no idea what the other person has or hasn't got. So his advice then was, I would punch the person as hard as I could and run away. He said, I wouldn't do flying kicks and that, because to be honest, I've probably got jeans on and smart shoes and you'll probably end up falling over. So his advice was, which I thought was very valid, was if you really need to react, you hit someone or do whatever you can as hard as you can and then run, because at least you wake up tomorrow morning and can, see how you are. And it was amazing the response I got, because I got some people literally said, I'm not talking to you again. I've unfollowed you. I'm not talking to you again because you've said something that's positive about him. And I said, have you actually read the article? And of course they hadn't. But as soon as you mentioned him in any kind of positive light, no matter what his message was, I had some people unfollow me, which is great, because polarization is so important. Now, I know it's a long answer for you, but I think the more people talk about topics that they feel uncomfortable about, or other people do, the better it is.
I'm not interested in the short answers. Life's too short, so
I'll tell you what's important is not being scared to offer your opinion, because sometimes you can enlighten people. So months ago, I went for lunch with some friends, and someone sat next to me who I'd never met before, very nice chap, and someone brought up, just as you did, the topic of Andrew Tate, and he turned from someone that was quite an eloquent chap to spouting stuff about how bad Andrew Tate was, etc., etc. And it was really interesting because, again, that's his opinion, which is great. I want to hear it. So I'm not there to tell him he's wrong. I just asked him some questions. I said, have you listened to, or no, not have you? I said, oh, it sounds like you've listened to quite a lot of his stuff. Like, what were your favorite interviews with him that you listened to? And of course, he looked blankly and said, oh, well, I haven't listened to any of his stuff. I said, oh, so where do you get your information from? And he said, oh, well, I read The Guardian and a government controlled paper. I read The Guardian and I saw it on whatever it was. And I said, oh, so your mind is made up by what someone else has told you? And he said, yeah. And I said, what was your thoughts on the fact that Andrew Tate's father was in the CIA, which you find a lot of people who have become famous, very famous in their own respect. Their parents, usually their father, was in some kind of US military. And he said, oh, I didn't know that. And I said, oh, right. So I wasn't there to tell him that he's right or wrong, because that's nothing to do with me. But I just wanted to ask him some questions to make him think, well, actually, I don't really know what I'm talking about with my very strong opinion. And maybe he went off and bothered to look into it. Maybe he didn't, but at least we didn't clash over it. I offered some interesting, thought-provoking suggestions to allow him to keep his kind of power in a relationship and go off and maybe educate himself.
Yeah, I think it's so easy to just latch on to other stories, other people's opinions and whatever else. And for me, it's a little bit like music. So that's one of my passions in life. Someone will say, what do you think of this artist? Well, I've never heard of any of their music, but I can tell from the name it's some sort of hip hop or something. And I'll be like, no, I don't like it.
Yeah.
Not interested. And one of those names was that I initially dismissed without hearing any of their music was Shikari.
Mm-hmm.
And then girlfriend went to see him with one of her friends and she'd listened to this music. I was thinking, that's got some interesting guitar riffs on it. Who's that? Oh, that's Anthony Shikari. He's like, fuck.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you're giving it a chance.
Yeah. And another one is, what's his name? I don't know. So can't remember his name. That's it. Snoop Dogg.
Yeah.
Can't stand his music.
Yeah.
But having listened to a 3-hour podcast of him talking to Joe Rogan, I actually respect the man that he is.
Yeah.
Even though I'll never buy one of his CDs.
That's why podcasting is so good, because just like you said, I've listened to some people that I would never have listened to, but I listen to them because of the host, not because of them. So it's like me with the Whole Man Academy.
Yeah.
Most of the guys people won't have heard of, but hopefully they will tune in because they believe in the fact that I will bring interesting people, well, always men, but interesting guests on. So to give them a chance to listen. And exactly like you've just said, some people before I've listened to a podcast because of the host and whoever's on. And at the end, I'm like, God, I completely changed my perception and my views on this person, because you don't know anything about them until you've listened to at least 1 hour of them talking and going off on different tangents. So yeah, it's another life lesson. It's a bit the old, walk a mile in my shoes, but spend an hour with me listening to me talking. And at the end of it, if you still think I'm a cock, just don't listen anymore.
Yeah, was it Albert Einstein that says you're better off listening because I'm better off listening because if I'm talking, I'm not learning anything.
Yes, good point. Yeah.
Sometimes have to remind myself of that when my kids are not doing what I'd like them to be doing.
We all have. If you think for me, the amount of great wisdom I've had kind of sent my way through the podcasts, and most of it you've forgotten, but sometimes it pops up when you're not thinking about it. So yeah, it's we're all learning as we go along.
Absolutely, it's one thing we never stop doing is learning.
Yep.
So what for you, Anthony, is a life well lived?
For me personally, it is number one is living with health, because I know people who have got lots of money but are unhealthy and they're unable to live the life they want, especially as they're going to get older, because they haven't taken care of themselves. So a life well lived for me to start with is looking after my health. And that means a strong body as well as a strong mind, eating, when I say the right things, fueling yourself like the body's meant to be fueled. Now, not to say I don't eat various stuff now and again, but I certainly don't eat, processed foods. I hardly ever eat that, because for me, you should treat your body like a race car, and you don't put crap in a race car. So health is one of them. Freedom is another. So when I worked in the city, I had this realization that, as a man of 35 who has to ask permission to have holiday, just didn't sit right with me. And I had that where at one point I asked for some time off because the family were going away, and the company, understandably, because they said, well, no, other people are away, so you can't go. And I was like, that doesn't sit right with me, that I don't have the freedom to just decide when and where I want to live my life. Financially, I think is very important. I don't have nearly as much money as I want to have. And I think it's been slightly demonized for people to say they want loads of money. But money amplifies who you are, I think, just like alcohol. So if you're a total bellend and you have alcohol or loads of money, you'll just be more of one. But if you're a kind, considerate, generous person, having loads of money means you've got options to help other people and do exciting stuff. So your health, your wealth, and the last one is there's two more, sorry. The purpose for me is, I'm living my purpose of working on the Whole Man Academy. And, I've got a lot of work to do, but I wake up every morning. It sounds corny, but I do wake up every morning looking forward to what I'm doing, as opposed to waking up being like, just looking at the clock and being like, how many hours have I got left? So that's very important for me. And then the last one is family. That is the most important thing for me. There's nothing I won't do for my kids and my partner and, my parents, et cetera, et cetera. And spending as much time with them as possible without going slightly mad sometimes is, for me, living a life well lived, not being, if I worked in my previous role, I would have left work at, let's say, I'd left the house at 6, I'd have got home at 6, I'd have seen the kids for 1 hour before bed. And then come the weekend, you'd feel under pressure to see them because you hadn't seen them all week. So the freedom, health, money, purpose, and family are kind of my top ones. And the last one I'm just delving into is spirituality. But that's one for another podcast.
Beautiful. So just a final question for today. As this podcast is called Relationship Revolutions, if there was one thing that we could all do, whether male or female, to bring a revolution to the world of dating and relationships, what would that one thing be?
Good question. I think assuming that people are in a relationship, it is talking more to their partners, like being honest about what you want, where you want to go. Because I see so many people that lead closed relationships and under the assumption that their partner either knows what they want or maybe they don't even care what their partner wants. So the conversations around your relationship and where you're going with it and what you expect out of it can be a real game changer.
Beautiful. Because let's face it, if we ran a business and never had a management meeting or a team meeting, that business is in a mess.
Yeah, you've got problems.
Absolutely. Anthony, it's been an honor and a pleasure having you on. And how can people reach out to you? How can they find you? How can they learn more about you? And all this stuff will be in the show notes as well.
Yeah, best way is to head to our website, which is wholemanacademy.com, all one word. And the one action or call to action I would do on there is basically sign up for our Whole Man Journal, which means that you get insights to maximize your mindset, body, and performance each week for free from me, and sometimes from other interesting men all across the world. And also the podcast is on all platforms. Just search Whole Man Academy, and then you can listen to hours of men talking about man stuff.
I have. In fact, I've listened to all of them.
I'm impressed.
Thank you for listening to the Relationship Revolutions podcast with Alan Watts, the Love Engineer. If you found this episode useful, please like, subscribe, and share.